want to bring in CNN's Katie Bowe-Lillis. She's got new reporting that U.S. intelligence did have some warnings about a prospect of more violence here from Hamas just days before Saturday's surprise attack. Katie Bowe, what did these reports say? How specific were they?
Yeah, so Anderson, what we have learned is that the intelligence community was circulating a pair of two separate intelligence assessments just in the days leading into October 7th's devastating attack. One of them on September 28th warned, based on multiple streams of intelligence, that Hamas was poised to escalate with some cross-border rocket fire into Israel. A separate October 5th wire from the CIA warned sort of generally of the increasing possibility of violence by Hamas. But Anderson, I think what's really important to understand here is that neither of these two reports provided any sort of specific tactical detail about the size, scope, scale, brutality of the attack that actually did occur on October 7th. So they were these sort of kind of high-level warnings that, look, the tensions in between sort of Palestinian militant groups and Israel are growing. There's an increased possibility for violence, but they weren't offering any sort of specific evidence of the planning for the attack that actually unfolded on Saturday.
Do we know if those reports were passed on to Israeli intelligence, or I mean, it sounds like it didn't really sound any particular alarm bells, because it kind of sounded like, well, there may be more rocket attacks, but nothing really too specific.
Yeah, so this is the important thing to understand, the nuance here to understand here, Anderson, is there's a big difference in between sort of strategic warning and kind of more kind of tactical warning about, okay, here's exactly what's about to happen. And so this was certainly kind of in the camp of strategic warning, right? And I think based on what our sources are telling us, for a lot of officials who were reading this intelligence, they were interpreting it correctly as like, look, there's, heightened tensions in the region, there's something to be concerned about, something could happen here. But they were sort of viewing this as likely another round of cross-border rocket fire. Maybe the Iron Dome intercepts some missiles, maybe Israel retaliates, maybe we even see something as dramatic as the clash that took place in 2021 in between Hamas and Israel. But they weren't in any way sort of imagining that these warnings were indicating something of the size and scale of what we did see on Saturday. As for whether or not this was shared with Israeli officials, because the United States doesn't do a lot of its own intelligence collection inside Gaza, it really relies on Israel to do a lot of that sort of raw reporting and a lot of that collection. It just sort of takes the information and then analyzes it for itself. Many of the officials that we spoke to said it wouldn't necessarily be indicated for the U.S. to sort of turn around and share these reports or share these sort of assessments with Israel, again, because much of the raw information in these intelligence assessments was coming from Israel in the first place, and Israel wasn't raising these alarm bells with the United States.
Katie Bowe-Lillis, appreciate the reporting. Thank you. Joining me now to talk more about this and other things happening in the region is Mark Esper. He was Defense Secretary under President Trump, is author of the book A Sacred Oath, Memoirs of a Secretary of Defense During Extraordinary Times. Secretary Esper, I appreciate you joining us. First of all, what do you make of this new information about U.S. intelligence warning that something may be happening, some uptick, not too specific? Should it have been caught? Should that have raised more alarms?
It's very interesting. I'm not surprised that we had some type of intelligence at that level. I am a little surprised that there wasn't more preparation taken on the Israeli end, if you will, to heighten the security level along the fence line, the border line between Israel and Gaza. I think there have been two failures. If you look at the situation now, one has been the intelligence failure, but the second one is a military readiness failure to step up patrol, surveillance, or whatnot along the border. So there'll be time for that later, but that's kind of what jumps to my mind when we talk about this.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, time for that later. But CNN did do a report. Just our Clarissa Ward was looking at what the Hamas, the training videos they were putting out, and we've geolocated a site that they built, which mirrored a Israeli settler community that they were doing training on, that was very close to one of the major boarding crossings and was visible from the air. It's remarkable that Israel did not pick up any real signs of this operation, which was clearly planned for a very long period of time, involving many, many different people.
Yeah, that was a very interesting report, and I read it with a good deal of curiosity that it would go back that far, and should have been visible Like I said, I think there will be time later. They'll go back and really dig into this. I think the immediate question, though, when you look at these pieces of information that should have been assessed, is clearly there was a blind spot. And as you go into this next phase where you're looking at a military incursion into Gaza and maybe some other things, I do think you want to make a quick check to make sure that those blind spots are no longer there. And so I think there is a need for an immediate assessment as to what happened and why. And then you can dig later, kind of pull each and every thread later. But that would be my concern, is what didn't we see over the past year, and why didn't we see it? And have we rectified that before we step into these next phases of the operation?
I want to ask you what you think about the idea of 1 million residents in Gaza moving south in a 24-hour period, which is what Israel is telling people to do. They dropped leaflets to do it. You have a number of humanitarian organizations saying this is impossible. It's going to lead to catastrophic consequences. Hamas is saying don't leave. I understand militarily why they would not want the civilian population to leave. They want to use them as much as possible as human shields. Have you seen mass migrations of people like that? Is that possible?
Look, moving 1 million people in 24 hours is a difficult task, but I've also never seen a military on the cusp of an invasion give a warning to the adversaries that they're coming in, and to allow citizens some time, if you will, to flee. Look, it's a tough situation. It was a situation brought on by these atrocious, terrible, barbaric terrorist acts by Hamas, killing over 1,300 Israelis, murdering, raping, slaughtering children, the elderly, and now on top of that, we know that we have 130 to 150 hostages in Gaza. I'd like to see these UN agencies come out and demand that Hamas release the hostages. That would be a great gesture as well. But look, it's a tough situation. Israel has every right to proceed, and I think they'll do so professionally. And I think they've given fair warning. And then I think, look, I'm in favor of opening up a humanitarian corridor in the south, but I would limit that to women, children, and the elderly, and try and address that side of the problem that way.
In terms of the fight ahead, how difficult do you think it's going to be? Obviously, there's the civilian component, there's the hostages to think about, and just operating in an urban environment like Gaza City. I mean, it is a warren of streets, and it is densely packed. How difficult from your perspective is it?
Very difficult. You know, first of all, at the strategic level, every day or moment that passes, you have to make sure that you don't create a second front with Hezbollah in the north, right? You don't want to fight two fronts at the same time. Of course, on top of that, as we already addressed, you have hostages. And so will Hamas follow through on their threats to begin executing hostages, Israelis, and Americans, by the way? We think they have a few Americans as this proceeds. At the tactical level, urban warfare is very, very difficult. I know from my time in the Army during the Gulf War, as we faced urban areas, it can consume a lot of troops very quickly. So I think part of what Israel is doing right now by flattening buildings and pummeling the area is really trying to reduce the amount of places and spaces and floors and doors and every place that Hamas can hide to ambush Israeli troops as they come through, and try and clear out the area as they try to uncover the subterranean networks that Hamas has built underneath Gaza. But it's really difficult. It can consume a lot of troops, even if they're not killed or injured. You just have to leave troops behind to protect the space. Part of my concern here is that maybe the lack of action by Hezbollah in the north isn't because they've made a strategic decision to sit the conflict out, but maybe they made an operational decision to execute some execute some patience and wait till the IDF gets really entrenched in Gaza, gets bogged down, and then they start something in the north. And that would be an operational matter, which I'm sure the IDF is considering very carefully as well.
Yeah, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, thank you for your time.